Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Neha, Ambassador of Change for GETI, that is Global Education and Training Institute, founded and conceptualized by Dr. Sunita Gandhi with the vision of disrupting education, the education movement as we know it. Additionally, we also organize pre-service and in-service training for teachers so that they can actually spearhead this disruptive education movement. And along the same banner, we organize detox where we invite policymakers, educators, practitioners, and researchers from around the world to discuss and share these best practices with us. And today, I'm very honored and thrilled to have with us Dr. Muralidhar, who is the former Chief Operating Officer and Board of Director for Manipal Education and Medical Group. And Sir will be talking to us about a very relevant topic that is reimagining K 12 education, and will be condensing his years of experience and rich background to help us reimagine education and also implement this imagination of ours, as I had discussion. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Neha. Thanks for your introduction, and good evening, all the audience who is present for this evening session. Uh, so I shall be taking you through this session on how the future of K-12 looks like, especially post this pandemic. And I think there have been a lot of, debate on this topic. I happen to read few UNESCO related articles also on this subject. McKinsey has done a lot of work around it. So this become very important. I think the way the pandemic has changed the entire scenario, the dynamics of K-12 education, how I look at from a crisis, how do you build it into an opportunity? And I think everybody, when I have been on, on my LinkedIn with quite a few academicians of K-12 across the globe. And I'm also, while being part of the Manipal group, I was handling as a DHR for the entire Manipal universities in India, and also Dubai, Malaysia, Antigua, Nepal. And prior to that, I was with Pearson Education. Pearson is a global player in education sector. And carrying my experience in both K-12 and higher education, I will try to do the best that I can to cover this topic. And I know most of you would be coming from education background. You would have really gone through this thing. I also draw a lot of inspiration from my wife, who's also a school teacher, teaches maths, and from the Pearson schools that I had interacted with, and based on my research on various on topics of this related field. So I shall be covering these aspects from during my short presentation today. Okay. So
Thank
the
you
topic
so much, sir.
covers, yeah.
Yeah, the presentation is on the screen, sir. You can please have the stage now. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So the topic is on reimagining future of K-12 education, crisis to an opportunity. Why I call crisis to an opportunity, I shall cover during my presentation. Why it's gone blank? Yeah, okay. Now, responding to changes that COVID-19 crisis has wrought on the education system around the world, it requires something that we need to build on, what we know works well, as well as looking ahead to what we know students will need. And I think if you look at prior to this pandemic, I think we have done very well in the academics, and I think we have produced the eminent scientists, engineers, medical professionals across the globe. And I think India was known as a talent house. I think since independence, we have focused on especially the three R's, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that was a very strong point that Indians had. And I think we produced, the talent for the global organizations today. You see whether it is Google or Microsoft or any of the organizations today globally, you find Indians in leadership positions and CEO positions, and which is a very healthy sign. But notwithstanding that, I think the new situation of COVID-19 has brought in certain challenges. And also, I would like to bring out this fact that, at a point in time when I started my corporate career, I was in a firm way back in 2008, in a firm called Tutor Vista. It was a startup. and we were providing online tutoring for US students then. And we never realized or thought that this would become a reality one day. Okay, because in US it was a costly proposition to go for a tutoring, which would cost about $100, 75 to $100 an hour. So we were providing about $100 an hour. Instead of an hour, we were providing for 1 month unlimited tutoring. Okay, and we were having almost 5,000 tutors across India on a learning platform. We were providing online tutoring then in 2008, and today it's become a reality. So I think as we move forward, I think there are going to be a lot of areas, a lot of challenges, how the whole system is evolving, and how we need to brace ourselves to face this challenge. Yeah. Now, coming to the insights to the impact, any crisis, it creates an opportunity, and it is for us to really tap that opportunity for a broader change. And as the education system begins to make decisions about investment, look at long-term imperatives to create a better system for students beyond pandemic. I think what we need to look at is not a short-term approach. Many would feel that this would go away, and we may be back to the school in full the older mode. But I think this has brought in certain aspects that we need to look at. How do we move into a hybrid mode? Today the organizations, corporates, at the workplaces, today they're talking about hybrid model. And even in education sector, we need to look at what we have learned in this pandemic. Some of these learnings, how we could utilize in our journey ahead. And that's why I say that we should not lose sight of what we have learned through decades of research and education reforms. I think, as I mentioned, in the last more than 75 years, post-independence, we have learned a lot. We've experimented. I think we have grown. If you look at the number of schools that were there earlier and today that we have, both in K-12 and higher education, I think we have done huge amount of work. Now, the COVID-19 is driving educators beyond the classroom. There were teachers, even if I look at my wife, for the matter, we had never used an online tool. Today they would have handled, various platforms, whether it is a Google Meet or a MS Teams or a Extra Marks or any of the new educational platforms that have come up on this thing. Today, even if you look at, Byju's, for that matter, it is a unicorn, which is more than $3,000 valuation today in the market. It has all grown during the pandemic time. Okay, so that shows that the use of online tools, video conferencing, learning management platforms has increased in this duration of this pandemic, and is going to continue to have an impact on the education system. The pandemic has also highlighted the inequities, especially the students who are well off, who are from, cities, and the students who are in the rural areas. I think this is something that we need to bridge this digital divide or the inequities. Some people have the best of devices, they have the internet connections, high quality education. Many a time we got to know that, in rural areas, people do not have the connectivity. They have to, so there was once a story about a student sitting on a treetop because he was not getting, internet connection access. So just to learn. And I think some of the state governments have come up with innovative ideas. I happen to see in Kerala, wherein the lessons are transmitted through the television channels. So a lot of innovative ideas have come up to meet this challenge. I think the next point is about the use of technology, and I think it is inevitable. And I think this pandemic has driven the fact that technology will continue, but at the same time, we now need to be conscious of the fact that technology will never replace a great teacher. A teacher place will always remain. Technology will only complement the entire education process. Now, coming to the next slide onto this thing. Now, how do we reimagine education post-COVID? It involves recommitting to what we know works. I think what we have learned over the years, in our educational reforms, the way we have experimented, I think that will stand good. But at the same time, I think we need to complement that with newer technology. And how do we make learning much more enriched and relevant to the current requirements of the industry, the workplaces, the whole dynamics of skills and education is going through a rapid change. And I think today, when you look at, I try to connect education with the workplace. because ultimately we are producing students who are capable, who will be taking on jobs in the future. Somewhere we also need to look at, how we shape them, how we mold them to face the future challenges. Because today, if you look at the entire workforce, the workplaces are becoming hybrid. Okay. The second thing that is happening in the in the space of work, in the space of careers, is that today people need to be have a very high learning agility. Today, most of jobs are getting redundant. The way disruption is happening in the environment, the way digitalization is happening, a lot of jobs are getting redundant and new jobs are getting created. So, the concept of lifelong learning will be very important in the coming days. If somebody has to really shape up their career, if they have to stay in their career, they have to make sure that they have a high learning agility. And the fact that today so many tie-ups are happening with the private bodies and IIMs and IITs, the kind of new programs that they are running, which are relevant to the industry. So nobody can say that, look, I finished my graduation, I've done my engineering, now I can lay back and have my good time. Okay. It doesn't happen. So today, as long as you want to work, you need to keep yourself updating yourself, reskilling yourself, and being relevant is very important. The next is about the core skills and instructions. You know, I think today, all said and done, a lot of people talk about why we can't have open schools, or the fact that we can do away with some amount of schooling and we students can work out of home. Uh, if you look at the entire scenario, the way things are, I think it's very important today to lay a strong foundation. A lot of students in the last 2.5 years have lost out a lot in terms of reduced syllabus, lack of personal interaction, and especially in subjects like maths and science. Today you need to have a very strong foundation in some of these subjects. It's but obvious that you won't be able to code if you don't know maths. You won't be able to communicate without written and verbal skills. And some of these things typically you learn on a face to face, on a physical interaction. So I think this will remain, and the schools will have to focus a lot on this. The knowledge has to be adopted in both remote and in person environment. I think the future, a lot of supplement and complementing of the existing education will happen through technology. So we need to benchmark our practices in both remote. How do we work in a remote model, come up with a good model, this thing model in terms of access, in terms of technology, in terms of content, in terms of our syllabi, in terms of our delivery. And also, we need to look at how do we make our personal environment, the school environment, much better, so that it's, the learning is, given in the best possible manner with the best standards. The next, I think the most important aspect is, I think in an Indian context, if you look at it more so in this thing, is that we need to have quality teachers. And I think that is where some of the lot of professional bodies which have come up in the last a decade or so. I was talking some time back with Neha about a teachers training foundation here in Bangalore, run by Reimagining, and I happened to interact with her a few years ago. So these are some of the new bodies that are coming up. A lot of new organizations are coming up to, besides what you learn in your B.Ed programs. I think there's a lot which needs to be done to update, reskill the teachers to face the current challenges. And the most important thing is, one, I think the children learn the best from people and not from programs. And that's very important to have good teachers. Today, when I look back, the schools where I studied, I did my schooling from KVs. And whichever KV, the two KVs that I studied, they have our alumni, on a group on the Facebooks. I think each of us, revere our teachers. They are, some of them are not there anymore, but there are old and distinct teachers. We talk about them. We really, appreciate the fact that whatever we are today is because of the effort put in by them. So I think we need to remember the fact that technology will never replace a great teacher. So we need to build some great teachers, and I think this is a profession. Over the years, somehow it has lost its charm. We need to, I think, one, invest in recruiting and helping a top talent become effective teachers. That happened, but before that, what is more important is to give a due place in society for teachers. I think post-independence, maybe till about 70s and 80s, I think teaching was able to attract good talent. But with the opening up of the economy, new opportunities, not many good talent came into teaching profession. I think if you look at, I worked with the Singapore government a few years ago, and I was really happy to see that in Singapore, some of the best talent going into teaching. It doesn't matter that whether you have done only BSc, BCom, or BA, that you get into, even students from engineering background, from higher end science specializations, people working in space, people have worked in industry, they work for 10, 15 years in industry, and then they go into teaching. Okay. So I think we need to look at a model where we are able to get good talent, for both in the system, and also the existing talent that is there. We need to really, train them to cope up with the current challenges, and how best they're able to deliver, and also understand the dynamic environment in which the students have to operate in the future. The next point is about developing and supporting teachers as they learn new skills for remote and hybrid learning. I think that there's a lot of stress on teachers today. I don't know, those of you who are in the schools today, you look at, and it's the same with even employees working in corporates. Uh, Although you are working in the comfort of your home, but people are stretching today for 10 to 12 hours a day. Okay. There are organizations looking at four days of working, 5 days of working, all that is going on in the corporate. But when you look at the teacher's role, I think we need to understand the kind of stress, the kind of effort that they have to put into cope with. A lot of them were not really equipped initially, when this pandemic happened, to deal with online delivery. But I think over a period of time, they have learned, they have, against all odds, they didn't have the access many a time, they didn't have a good learning platforms, but they have been able to overcome. So I think we need to, one, I think, support them morally. The institution have to really work to retain talent, give respect to this profession, and also help them to cope up with the challenge in both remote and hybrid learning environment. The next is about the performance measurement. I think this is something, as the pandemic gets over and as we move forward. And I've also realized this when I was with Pearson Group and we had 30 schools. We used to work with them, and as a head of HR, I think somewhere, the performance measurement will happen. Okay. It is happening today in higher education, especially in IITs and IIMs and other institutions. But I think in the schools environment also, some kind of a performance measurement has to happen. If you need to really build a pool, keep them motivated, differentiate with some incentives. For that, you need to have some kind of a performance yardsticks. It cannot be something which is not measurable. So that's one of the reasons that we say that it is hard to achieve excellence without data. Data is very important on the current performance and the benchmarks. So somewhere I think the institutions, education institutions, have to become a bit more professional. Some of the institutions today, like I saw in Dubai and other places, they have their own small HR setup in the schools today. Okay. But at the same time, we are in a profession of teaching. We are dealing with students. Okay, we can't be as hardened as corporates. We need to be humane. At the same time, we need to look at how do we support the students, the teachers, and the data should not be used to punish or to push back people, but it should be used to reform, or it should be used to build skills. The other aspect is about formative assessments. I think this is another area where I think the schools have to look at coming up with we cannot be looking at the year end performance measurements or year end results or half yearly results. Like today, when you look at some of the top B schools and others, they have come up with you know short quick quizzes. So periodic quizzes. Use How do you use your current? You have the IT systems today. You can have a huge question bank. You can jumble these questions. You can have frequent quizzes. It will not take much of time and effort. It's already there in a secured drive, and teachers can give these assessment to ensure that the students have had the desired learning, rather than waiting for the half yearly or the annual examination to see how the students have picked up the thing. Okay. So you have unit tests and other things, but I think with an IT tool, it will become much more effective. Now, coming to the next slide, it's about the performance level and context. So the schools at different level of performance infrastructure require different interventions. I think this is something, they can't be a uniform yardstick for all kind of institutions. There are institutions who are well off, your international schools, public schools, where the parents can afford to have the best of technology. The schools can afford that. At the same time, we have the government schools or schools in the rural areas, where they are not even able to get even their internet access. So I think this is where we need to come up with, its own, tools and assessments which are affordable. At the same time, it's not creating the kind of inequities or the divide that some people get left out. We need to look at decentralized innovation, peer-led learning. How do we engage staff and students? I think the motivation is a very important aspect, and that's where we need to come up with new ways of engaging staff and students. Remote learning is something we have, as I mentioned earlier, about the Kerala model, where you have that mass TV and radio programs, better connectivity, access device to close to digital divide. See, the biggest fear that's going to happen is that post this thing is that the digital divide and inequities. I think somewhere we need to address this issue, and I think the government has to play an important role in ensuring that the divide does not get wider or it does not impact students from underprivileged background. The next is to need to move beyond existing approaches. In this digital era, and this is something which education was not impacted prior to the pandemic. But whereas the corporate environment, it had definitely impacted, and I had seen the last about 5 to 6 years a huge emphasis on technology, new ways of learning. We used to have our own learning platforms for employees, so that they can acquire themselves, they can get certified, and now with the online platforms like MOOCs, massive open online programs like Coursera, and other the same organizations, they have these programs. So the traditional learning will not be replaced, but it gets complemented with the technology, and that's what is going to be the future. The other important aspect is that we need to harness technology to scale access. I think this pandemic has shown something that today we can have access to people across locations. Earlier, we were very fond of physical presence in the offices. Till we see somebody in the office, we were not really satisfied. Somebody said, "I would work from home." Although the IT companies have started working this today, if you look at most of the organizations are working using technology. Employees don't come to office, but they are able to deliver without even seeing their bosses. So I think the most important thing is that in the education sector, one, we need to be a bit more, I think, focused on training the students, teachers on handling devices. And also the important aspect is when technology comes in, it also has certain adverse effects, typically in terms of the IT security. A lot of the students getting affected by use of mobiles and others. Maybe undesirable content could be there. So I think we need to teach. We need to make students aware of some of the pitfalls that would be there with technology. So one, it definitely will improve learning, but then it cannot be the sole factor. I think the teacher interface will always remain. And the other aspect has been in the last 2 years, the experience has been that your lectures on video call and all is fine, but it cannot replace face-to-face learning. I think we need to accept the fact that face-to-face learning will be there, but it will get complemented with video calls. Today, you look at many of the IIMs are running programs for executives. They just come to campus for a few days, and the other most of the time, they are working out of their home, maybe on a Saturday, Sunday, attending classes, and the IIMs are giving certifications. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, technology will always complement the learning, the face-to-face learning that's happening. And I think the other aspect is that many places, especially in rural areas, where there is a limitation in terms of resources, getting good talent teacher pool. So I think that's where we need to look at something like solar powered tablets. How do some of these well established schools how they can mentor some of these schools. So there's a point which I'll be covering in the subsequent slides. How do they mentor and build up the talent pool in rural areas? That will also be equally important. The other thing is about moving towards mastery-based learning. Okay. The personalized mastery-based learning has been around for more than a decade, but most of these learnings do not reach the entire student population. Somewhere these smart adaptive technology platforms can be integrated for instruction, practice, feedback. So let me tell you one thing. I think I have, while I was with Manipal Group and earlier into Vista, I have seen quite a few learning platforms, which we had developed both for learning as well as assessment. We had an arm called MeritTrack, and we used to assess, a lot of these public service commissions and others. They used to use our platform for assessment purpose. Today, a good platform should be able to deliver, should be able to give the best of content available, give those linkages. Suppose you are studying biology, it's something which is out of your syllabus, which you need to relate to, need to learn. You can immediately navigate your way into those contents. You have test practices. You are able to give a feedback. So I think there can be a lot of interaction, but for that, the students as well as the teaching community have to be well prepared. And the other thing is also the learning, whether the student has grasped the learning or not. As I mentioned earlier, one doesn't have to wait for the end of the examination. You can have continuous evaluation. Once you finish a chapter or once you finish few modules, you can have an evaluation immediately. I think using the technology platforms. As to the schools are investing in software solution for both the remote and hybrid learning, uh, they can plan for a personal learning. It has to be, as I mentioned earlier, a blended model. You know how do you leverage technology to deliver the best learning solutions to your students, and that's what is something I think we need to look at, uh, where a lot of industry interface. And I'll mention in my subsequent slide about academia interface, academia industry interface, which has to happen in terms of what is the expectation of education system from the industry in terms of delivering good learning platforms, good softwares. So today, if you look at, I think you would have all those who have used technology platforms, you would have realized one thing: there is no perfect platform as now. They're also evolving. They were not really prepared for this pandemic, whether it is MS Teams or whether it's Google Meet or any of those platforms. So they have evolved, they have learned on this thing, and I think this learning will be definitely useful. And I think they need to really build something which meets the requirement of the end user. The other aspect that has come up, I think, during this pandemic has been, I think, those of you who are from the education background and those who teach students on this thing, is that there's a lot of impact on the students, and that's where we need to support them holistically. There has to be a good correlation between mindset and academic performance. And I think this has really impacted a lot of students who have gone through this phase. So they lost their near and dear ones. The kind of pressure in terms of adapting to technology, lack of face-to-face interactions, no peer meeting, the student group engagements. They learn a lot in the schools, interacting with their, fellow students, with teachers, the different extracurricular activities. I think this is where I think the schools need to come up with innovative ways to engage student, and it's very important to have a high level of self motivation, persistence, and independence. And also, this pandemic has raised that awareness and a need to address anxiety. Today, if you look at a lot of children or schools are having their own counselors. How do you address anxiety, depression, other mental conditions as a precondition to help students learn? See, earlier, a lot of these things would get addressed naturally when you are in a physical contact or in a physical presence in the school. But this pandemic has really driven this point of mental health. Although in Indian context, it was not so much, a requirement, but I think this pandemic has brought it quite open, and it is quite evident that we need to address the mental health issues also. And I think apart from that, today, when you have a remote learning environment, it's important to create and come up with innovative ways. How do you make encourage students to be inquirers, knowledgeable, thinkers, communicators, open-minded? Because see, these are some of the qualities that you need as you grow up to build your emotional quotient and also to be successful in your careers. And some of these things are built in the schools. How you participate in debates, declamation contest, whether you organize events in the school, sports, NCC, and so many activities are there in the schools. So in the absence of that, how do you build these qualities in students? The next is, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, it's very important to help students to adapt to the future of work. The workplace has changed drastically in the last 2 years. Those of us, the old timers, today, if we go back to the work and we look at the way work is being done, it's been a sea change. And in the corporate environment, today people have given away their huge office spaces. Co-working spaces have come up. Today, people are working totally on technology, in terms of delivery, in terms of expectation settings, in terms of virtual meets, in terms of employee engagement. I think everything has become virtual. So today, this is also, in a way, driven the fact that the organization don't require huge workspaces. You don't have to come to the office every day. So I think this is some learning which will continue to some extent as we move forward. So we need to prepare students to adapt to the way the future of work is going to be. The workplace is having a rapid changes. As I mentioned earlier, we need to be aware of digitization that's happening in our entire workflow. Right from joining till exit, everything today is digitized. The environment that you work needs to have those ethical standards. Cyber security has become very important, whether in schools or in corporate environment. How you operate, whether the kind of links, kind of message you get, whether you should open, should not open. How do you do online transactions? So the kind of security aspect you need to keep in mind. This need to be inculcated in children right from the school stage. Impact on health is very important, especially even employees are complaining in the organization of the burnout. So how do you maintain the right balance between work and your work life to ensure that you lead a healthy life? Your forensics and so many things are there. I think as security makes your life, as your technology makes your life easier, at the same time it has certain pitfalls, and we need to be aware of those things. Things happening in forensics, in IT, cyberspace, and cybersecurity, IT security. So a lot of these things will be there, and also the fact that we need to be have a very high level of IT knowledge, both with networking and also a bit on programming. How do we operate our systems or the future technology now with the AI, your machine learning, and so many new areas that is coming up. I think we need to have a high level of computer programming and digital literacy, and this is becoming a core skills today. You know, so whether it's a nanosciences or IoT coming in, or today AI, machine learning, these are very common things and new computer languages that are coming up. The other most important thing is, unlike conventional schools and this thing, the career counseling, profile building, essays, SOPs. Today, there were some colleges, they have done away with the entrance exam. They are judging students based on certain essays, how they have performed during their schools, how they built the profiles. And especially overseas colleges, a lot of them are emphasizing on statement of purpose, your essays, your entire profile in the schools, whether what leadership position that you have handled, extracurricular activities that you have participated, how many awards that you have won. All this have a score, for entrance into top schools, colleges in overseas. And also the fact that today in India, a lot of new universities are coming up, like your Jindal University, Ashoka University. All these are placing a lot of importance besides academics on other aspects. So we need to help students to learn these skills while they are in school. The next is, as I told you, is a very important aspect, is to unbundle the role of teacher. The role of teacher today has undergone a drastic change. The expectations. I think we need to be realistic with fact, especially the schools management, the school administrators. They need to understand the fact that the teachers have a huge pressure on them, especially more so in a hybrid model, where the expectations are totally different from a conventional model. So that's where I think we need to free them from certain unproductive activities, so they can spend more time on high value activities, and I think focus more on deep teaching expertise and relationships. The stress on remote and hybrid learning is already catalyzing. And I also came across few teachers who are elderly teachers who quit teaching. They said, no, we can't cope up with this model of delivery. Okay. So I think that there's a lot of burnout happening on this thing. I think we need to be realize this fact, ensure we give them that respect, the space, the kind of training to ensure they're equipped to deal with the new realities. They should be able to take on differentiated roles. We need to identify their strengths, preferences, area of expertise. Whether you make them HODs or whether you give them certain combination of administrative and teaching roles. How do you build your succession plans in the schools? I think a lot of this will require a deep focus, unlike earlier times. I think this pandemic has, as I mentioned earlier, has really opened our eyes toward the fact that we need to allocate resources equitably to support every student. And my biggest worry, and I think most of the studies happening across the globe, has been this issue of digital divide and inequities, in the society, which would be a dangerous thing, because people who have the access to technology, access to resources, and vis-a-vis people who do not have, okay, there is going to be a huge gap, which needs to be addressed, at the earliest. There has to be an inclusive and equitable quality of education and promote lifelong learning. And this is a fact I think which we need to inculcate in students right from the school stage. As I mentioned earlier, in the industry today, lifelong learning has become very important to stay relevant. The way disruption is happening in the working places because of technology changes. What was, if you learned something say 10 years back, that's not relevant today. Every day new technology, new programs, new way of doing things is being driven by technology. So one has to be up to date with changes happening. Access to high quality education, I think this is something very important to bridge the inequities. Definitely, it will not be possible to give the same quality across the country, but the gap should not be too wide. And I think this is something both our policymakers, administrators, the schools have to look at. Has to be a more equitable education system, incentivize good schools. And I think something we need to look at is how some of the well-off schools are able to mentor or support the less privileged schools. Something like a school in Bangalore, okay, or in Lucknow, is able to support a school in, say, Amethi, okay, where if you have some good, teachers, good system in this thing, can you adapt or can you support a school which is less privileged? I mean, these are certain things we need to look with an open mind. We need to look at again, the whole education system is undergoing changes, and that's where we need to look at how do we make it more professional, how do we look at our structures and policies. And most of these school systems are following very age old policies, very rigid, very bureaucratic. And that is where I think we need to build a system which is a catalyst for innovation, rethinking our grading systems, mode of education delivery, teachers' compensation, incentives, promotion, career ladders. See, these are certain things easier said than done. I think education, as educationists, we have never ever bothered to look at these aspects. These are typically looked at by corporate entities. But I think some amount of these good practices need to be incorporated in the education system. It is a fact that a lot of our policies and a lot of the framework that we have in schools today are very bureaucratic. One school formulates, the other school follow it. I think if you need to bring in creativity, if you want to create an open environment, if you want to have better decision making, I think we need to make our professionals, our structures agile, so that the changes can be adapted faster. We need to have smart system to improve partnership, networks, collaboration. I think this is technology is something. Let me tell you one thing: it can really do wonders. But today we are looking at only just as a delivery mode. it does not suffice. Today, you can have a lot of learning, lot of partnerships, lot of networks, collaboration tools are there which would deliver better education. I think we need to harness the technology, and that's where I think the schools have to invest in having good IT setup in schools. We need to have employee-friendly policies. And as I mentioned earlier, uh, somehow the education sector has not been able to attract good talent. I think people need to come from various, across industries, across, domains to the teaching profession. It should be something a magnet to attract talent. I think we need to build a good, open, tolerant, inclusive work environment free from fear to attract good talent. It's only then, you can get the best of talent. Now, with this presentation, my conclusion talk would be that the youth is the future of this nation, and we need to emerge stronger from here. I think India has, in the globally, if you look at in the global index, India has the youngest population today. Countries like Japan and the European countries, they are aging. I think we have very high stakes because of the large youth population that we have. I think this is where I think we need to harness the youth power. We need to give the best of education, the best of technology, and learn from this pandemic. And how do we move forward? As I mentioned earlier, we need to have blended learning and ensure that we create the best future generation for our country. And what it requires is optimism. I think we can't be pessimist from the fact that we have undergone a pandemic. A lot of things has now gone under the water, but I think time to really build up on that. And uninterrupted learning, unconditional empathy, and unwavering support. I think this is somewhere I think a lot, as I mentioned about the mental health condition. I think today the students, teachers, both require the support from the educational institutions. I think we need to build up a good model which is able to deliver and do justice for our future generation. With this presentation, I this is my end of the presentation. I help today a lot of schools and students in the area of career counseling in terms of career guidance. How do they need to adapt to take on this thing through the psychometric assessment, and also profile building, which is very important today. How do you build profile right from a school stage so that you can get into the best of the colleges global environment? And this is, and also the working professionals. So this is something that I do out of my passion, and that's all from my end. So I'm open for any question Q&A session now. Thank you, Neha, for that.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very exhaustive and very wonderful presentation. There are certain points which struck out, and I would like you to, sort of build on them. The first one was when you talked about that we're preparing students for, a workplace with skills that do not exist right now, with maybe jobs that do not exist right now. So,
Yeah.
as a teacher training institute, what would be your advice to our teachers, or maybe teachers like in general, how they could actually mold their teaching or facilitate their teaching in a way that actually prepares students for maybe jobs that right now don't exist, with skills. We also have we have been revamping on skills. We have to make them think critically, be more empathetic and compassionate. So how can teachers do that? Any teacher, be a maths teacher or a social science teacher. How, what would be your advice for them?
Okay, fine. I think, see, if you when you look at the biggest drawback, if you have been looking at from the Indian education system, it has produced some of the finest talent across the globe. Whether our IITs have done wonderful job in the last more than 70 years, of the existence. But what has been lacking is that we call this a rot system of learning. It's been more of mugging and producing on the thing. And what the some of the Western countries, especially in US and some of the leading schools, what they look at is application based learning. Okay, so this is something I think we need to come up with, and especially the technology will definitely allow you to do that. I don't know if some of you have taken a GMAT test. It throws out, it does not give the same questions to every student. It throws out question based on your ability. Okay, so that whether you're able to answer certain question, it picks up through machine learning model. So technology allows you to do that. Each student is different. Each one has different grasping power. Okay, So accordingly, how do we tweak your learning? Okay. So that's one aspect. Of one important aspect is the application based learning. So I think that's where I think you need to, I think, come up with innovative ways that how do you put across questions? How do you ensure the learning happens? Because ultimately, when you have an application-based learning, those students, when they go to universities or when they go to job, they're able to perform much better because in job scenario, uh, the situation will keep changing. And today is a very dynamic environment. Today, what is there within 10 days, within 1 year, 2 years, the same thing will not be there. So how you're able
Absolutely.
to, go into an application-based approach to solve a particular problem. You need to be critical thinkers. Okay, today, the way the situation is happening, the way the changes are happening, the way digitization is changing the scenario, I think you need to build critical thinkers who can think independently, who can question, you know,
Yep.
who can, these are the qualities they can build up in a school, in a stream. And I mentioned about the, learning aspect of it. See, there is
Yeah.
something beyond your curriculum. How do you encourage children to learn beyond the textbook prescribed? Okay, how do
Absolutely.
you guide them to go into different websites? How do you give them that additional? How do you encourage them to do research?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
these are certain areas because unless you build this capability today, the aspect that, other aspect I mentioned about is I find a lot of students when I guide them, for, admission into overseas campuses, they don't have a profile at all. They've done
Yep.
nothing other than their academics in the school. So how do you
Absolutely.
expect you to get into, say, Stanford or Wharton or any top college? You may have a GMAT score of, say, 730 or 740, but you have not done anything, apart from your studies. You don't stand any chance. So you need
Absolutely.
to, encourage students to be member of different clubs, lead those clubs, come up with innovative ways, some solutions, some publications, some journals, the kind of reading, being a member of certain committees, so how do you explore what are the different kind of magazines that are coming up in the market related to a particular subject? What is the how do you identify the area of interest, and how do you really guide them, to take on certain professions, and what does it require, to reach, build your to reach your aim? If you need to take up a certain profession in the science, in the sphere of science, technology, engineering, what kind of skills you need to build up right from schools? This is something which is lacking, and I think, the counselors or career counselors and others, and the school administration has to look at how do you build these capabilities in the teachers, to train students.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for taking that question. The next question I have is not exactly a question, I would say. It's more of a thought that I have. When you mentioned that there's a lack of, talent in the teaching profession, one reason which I think is that teachers in general do not. I mean, maybe there is a lack of respect for teachers, or teachers don't consider themselves, as professionals. Because we've interviewed a lot of teachers, and when you ask them, "Do you think you're a professional?" So they, take a pause for a second because they don't know what to answer next. So, how do you plan, or what would be your advice in this direction to, make teaching, it's a respectable profession, yes, one thing, but how do we make, attract talent to the teaching profession? Is it the low income, or is it just the in general lack of, respect or towards the, dignity of the teaching profession, or is it just the teachers themselves? I mean, I'm not able to pinpoint out exactly what the question over here is, but if you get the question, maybe then would you like to take this one?
Yeah. See, I think when you look at, as I mentioned earlier, one, I think over the years, when I was a young student, the kind of respect that I had for my teachers, or the society had that respect for the teachers, was
Yeah.
something, because those days the opportunities were very limited. You had no IT industry or anything. There were few manufacturing organizations. But I
Yes,
think,
yes.
if you look at in the society as a whole, I think teachers had a very respectable position. It's not the salary alone, but I think
Okay.
they were looked up. Okay, that's one. The
Yeah.
second aspect is to do with, we have not changed with time. Okay, a lot of private schools have opened up, all said and done, but I think a lot needs to be done in terms of motivating, engaging. It cannot be hire and fire. So I think, even the practices. I know some of the schools, they will keep the certificates with them. When somebody joins, all that kind of things happen, which somewhat does not motivate good people to come into teaching profession. And other aspect is definitely the compensation. And I think we need to pay them respectable compensation. But then everybody can't afford, then you need to increase. It's a chicken and egg story if you look at it. Okay, but that's all said and done. The government today, there are government spends a lot of money on this thing. The sad part is that some of the government schools have not really measured up to the expectation. They can definitely deliver, and I think KVs have done a good job in terms of KVs or Navodaya schools and all that. They have produced good talent, and I think they have a good poor teacher pool. They have, but then I think if you the other aspect is to look at is I think we need to change our policies. Today there will be a lot of people who are in their 50s and 60s. Why have age restriction? Somebody who's been a good engineer and he has got a passion for teaching. Why don't you allow him to come and teach? He can bring. There's a scientist from ISRO. Okay, somebody who has worked in HAL. Okay, somebody who has been a CEO or a CEO of a organization. Why can't he come to a school and take few lessons in the subject? Somebody is good in
Okay.
economics. Okay, somebody who has been worked as a banker, as an economist in Reserve Bank of India. Why can't he come? And today you have all the rules, 60 years, 58 years, all the stuff is there. So I think we need to think differently. We need to think out of box. Okay, see, this is what Singapore has done. It's a small country. There, the teachers are one of the most respected profession. Okay, and
Yep.
they pick up the best students for teaching profession. They're able to do. It's a small country. They're able to do that. But I think unless you build a good pool of teachers, what is the kind of student that you're going to ultimately have? So I think we need to
Absolutely.
do our deep thinking on this aspect. And I think all the policy makers, there are different stakeholders, all have to play the game well.
That's the thought, sir. That's a beautiful thought that you've mentioned. Thank you so much for taking us through, various aspects of education in order to reimagine education from edtech to talent to what we can do to teachers to unburden them in a way so that they can teach more perfectly. And also, I really like the points where you mentioned hybrid and online learning. That's actually a very untouched and it's in the process of being researched, I would say. Thank you so much for covering that as well. Would you do you have any concluding thoughts for our audience before we conclude the talk?
Yeah, my the thing is that let's not brood over the fact that we have lost out something in the pandemic. And I think the important aspect is to look at this crisis as an opportunity to build our future. But at the same time, as I mentioned, I think the entire focus has to be on the teacher, and something that's which we have neglected. I think you can have the best of building, you can have best of facilities, but unless you're able to take care of your teacher, whatever you do, it will be of may not have much impact. I think we need to have highly motivated, respected, and well qualified talent pool in the teaching profession. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think all our policies, the NEP also, and all our policies around the world agree to this that teachers have to be at the center, of education to create a more inclusive and equitable education for all students. That's a thought, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very honored to have you today and hear your thoughts. Thank you so much, sir, and hope you have a good evening.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Neha.
Thank
Thanks, the entire audience, for the patient. Although we cannot interact face to face, but I think in a virtual mode, whatever we have done. And anytime you need any clarification thing, you can call back to me. My website is I mentioned on this thing. So thank you very much, and wish you a good days ahead. Thank you.
thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.